Welcome back, explorers, to Whoosh Tales, the home of the most extraordinary kids' adventure stories anywhere on the internet, bringing you a brand new English story for children every single week. This is episode 10. And before we begin today, I need to tell you that this is going to be a different kind of adventure story than the ones that have come before. It is the same series, same characters, same world, but where the previous 9 episodes have taken you to the edge of the world and into deep space and beneath the ocean and inside the mountain and across the Mediterranean, this one stays at home, in a stone cottage, around a kitchen table, across a long, quiet evening conversation. Because some of the most important adventures in your life will not happen in dramatic places. They will happen at a kitchen table when someone you love finally tells you the truth about something you needed to know. Finn brought Anya's sentence home with him in the small hours of the Highland morning and slept restlessly with it under his pillow, the way a child sleeps with something fragile that they do not want to forget the location of. In the morning, he woke before Caleb and lay on his back for a long time looking at the ceiling and turning the sentence carefully over and over in his mind. 8 words. His grandfather did not die the way the family was told he died, plus the addition Anya had given him with the same careful gentleness. He gave his life. There is a difference, and the difference matters. He had been told the story of his grandfather's death often enough that the words of it had become smooth and slightly worn, the way certain stories get when they've been told many times of family. Grandfather had gone out walking on a high moor above Stonehaven one cold day in late autumn when Finn was a baby. He had not come back. A search party had been organized. They found his walking stick and his old wool jacket and the wide blue scarf he always wore folded carefully and laid on a flat rock at the very edge of a steep drop, with no sign of his body below or around. People had said it must have been a fall, the cold and the steepness and the time of year. Finn's mother had grieved him quietly and consistently for the next 10 years, and then had moved on the way people move on, by which is meant she had built a life that contained the absence rather than pretending the absence was not there. Finn had grown up knowing his grandfather only through photographs and stories, and the single brass compass that had passed him on his 5th birthday in a small wooden box with the slanted urgent handwriting on the inside of the lid that said simply, "This is yours now." He had never questioned the story. There had been no obvious reason to question it. But now, lying in his bed in the quiet pre-dawn dark, Finn understood with a particular clarity that arrived with Anya's sentence that the story had been technically true, but enormously incomplete. The walking stick, the jacket, the folded scarf on the flat rock. They had all happened, just not for the reasons the family had been told. Something else had happened that day, and only one person in Stonehaven knew the full shape of it. Caleb woke shortly after Finn did. The way Caleb always seemed awake, calmly, fully alert from one breath to the next, no slow, drowsy transition. He sat up on his pile of blankets and looked at Finn lying on the bed and said quietly, "You have not slept." Finn looked at him. "I slept some," he said. Caleb considered him with the kind of attention that was becoming his signature. "Today," he said. "We talked to Old Thomas today." Finn nodded. Caleb did not have to say anything else. They understood each other in the silent way that is one of the small miracles of having a brother who shares your deepest quality of seeing. They got up. They got dressed. They went downstairs. Nora was already in the kitchen, which surprised neither of them because Nora was almost always already in the kitchen on important mornings. She had bread baking. She had 3 pots of tea ready. She had laid out the good cups, the ones with the small painted blue flowers around the rim that their mother only used for the most particular occasions. She looked at her brothers as they came in, and she said, simply, "I sent a message to Old Thomas before either of you were up. He will be here at 6. Finn looked at her. Nora shrugged slightly. "I knew," she said. "I have been knowing since yesterday on the dragon flying home. You were going to need this conversation today, and you were going to need it to happen properly. So I made sure it would." Their mother was visiting Finn's aunt in Edinburgh for the week. The cottage was theirs. The kitchen was warm. The tea was ready. Everything that could be prepared had been prepared. Nora's particular gift for organizing conditions for important things had once again quietly arranged itself around them. Old Thomas arrived at 6 o'clock exactly. He came in his usual way, knocking once with his wooden staff against the open door frame rather than at the door itself, walking in without ceremony, removing his cap as he stepped over the threshold. He looked older this evening than Finn had ever seen him look. Not weaker, just older, as if some weight he had carried for 40 years had become heavier in the last 12 hours rather than lighter, anticipating the conversation that was about to happen. He sat down at the kitchen table in the chair he had always sat in when he'd come to talk with their grandfather. All those years ago, Nora poured him tea. He wrapped both hands around a cup and looked at the steam rising for a long moment. Then he looked up at Finn. "Tell me," he said. Finn told him. He repeated Anya's sentence, exactly the way she had said it to him in the Mediterranean meadow with her hand holding his across the worn blanket, word for word. Old Thomas closed his eyes briefly as he listened, and when he opened them they were wet, which Finn had never seen before in all his 10 years of knowing the old man. He nodded once slowly. Then he set his teacup down on the table and folded his weather hands in front of him and said, "All right, boys. I have been waiting 10 years to tell you this. Listen carefully. I will only have the strength to tell it once." He told them. Caleb sat very still on his side of the table. Nora sat between her brothers with her hands flat against the wood. Finn watched Old Thomas the way Old Thomas had once watched him on the night the dragon crashed into their garden, with the full, unhurried presence that this kind of conversation deserved. The kitchen was quiet around them. The fire in the small stone hearth crackled gently. Outside the cottage window, the Highland evening was beginning to settle, the sky deepening from gold to deep violet over the village rooftops. Old Thomas began. "Your grandfather," he said, "had known for the last 3 years of his life that there was a creature trapped in a place no light could reach. He had learned about it from a mountain, the same way you learned about it, Finn. The mountain had shown him on his last visit. There was a chamber in the absolute geological core of the world, far below even the deepest chamber you have visited so far, far below anywhere any human had ever traveled, where something ancient and good and quietly important had been trapped for 3,000 years. Not by malice, by an accident. A shifting of the deepest plates of the earth had closed the chamber and sealed it from any natural light, and the creature inside it, a being that was kin to Caleb's kind, kin to the old ones, made of held warmth and slow patient light, had been waiting in the dark ever since, waiting for someone to come, waiting for the light to be brought back. Old Thomas paused. The mountain had told your grandfather this, and your grandfather had spent his last 3 years working out what to do about it. He could not bring the light himself. He was not an old one. He had been gifted the original compass and the access to the chambers and the knowledge of the system. But the gift of holding sunlight was not his gift. He needed an old one, and the only living one at the time was Anya, and Anya was already committed to waiting in her meadow for the new one who might one day arrive in our family. He could not ask her to leave her post. So your grandfather did the only thing he could do. He went down himself, alone, to the chamber in the core of the world, to keep the trapped creature company, to sit with it, so that it would not be alone in the dark for the last 100 years, until the new old one was old enough to come and free it properly. Caleb made a small sound, very quiet, almost a breath. Old Thomas looked at him gently. "Yes, child," the old man said. "Yes." He went down to wait with the creature. He went down knowing he would not come back up, and he laid his walking stick and his jacket and his scarf on the high moor before he descended, in a place where they would be found, so that your grandmother and your mother would have something to find and would be able to grieve him in the normal way, so that they could move on, so that the village could think it was a fall in autumn and put up a small stone marker and tell the simple version of the story that families need to tell when they lose someone. He was 62 years old. He had a wife of 40 years and a son of 38, and a granddaughter of 4 and a grandson of 1. He walked up the high moor on a cold November morning, and he sat with all of them in his mind one at a time, and he said goodbye carefully to each of them, and then he walked down into mountain and along the passages your mountain showed you, and down further than you have gone and down further still, until he reached the chamber in the absolute core of the world. He sat down beside the trapped creature. The creature was not able to speak in any sense Finn would understand, but it was able to know, and what it knew when your grandfather sat down beside it was that another presence had finally come, and that the long loneliness of 3,000 years had a companion now for whatever years your grandfather had left to give it. Your grandfather had brought something with him in his coat pocket, a small device he had built over the previous 3 years, an object that could hold the impression of a person and slowly release it in tiny increments across a very long time. He activated it as he sat down beside the creature. He sat for about an hour beside it, before his body simply could not continue. He was an old man. The descent had been very difficult. He was tired. He closed his eyes. He died there, in the dark, beside the creature he had come to keep company. But the device he had built, that device held impression of him, and for the last 10 years has been quietly releasing his presence into the chamber in slow, continuous increments, so that the creature has not been alone in the dark since the day your grandfather went down. Even though his body has not been there, his presence has been there. The companionship he came to give has continued for 10 years, and will continue for another 70 or 80 years until the device finally runs down. Old Thomas stopped. The kitchen was completely silent. Outside the window, the Highland evening had darkened into full night, and the first stars were beginning to show above the village. Nora was crying quietly with her hand over her mouth, the tears running down her face without sound. Caleb was sitting very still, his eyes open and full, but not yet overflowing, his expression one profound, deep understanding. Finn had not yet moved. He sat looking at old Thomas across the table and trying to find the shape of his own grandfather inside this new, larger version of his story. The man who had been technically known to him as a baby and never since, and who had spent his last 3 years quietly building a device that would let his presence continue to comfort a creature in the dark for nearly 100 years after his own body could no longer do so. Finn finally found his voice. "The creature," he said, "it is still there." Old Thomas nodded. "Still there," he said, "still waiting, still being kept company by your grandfather's presence. But the device is starting to slow. Anya knows. The mountain knows. The creature itself knows. Your grandfather built it as carefully as he could, but no human device lasts forever, and the presence it carries is now becoming thinner. The creature will start to feel the loneliness returning soon. Within months, possibly, a year at most." Finn looked at Caleb. Caleb was already looking at him. They did not need to say it. The compass that pointed south had taken them to Anya. The next step, when it came, would point them down into the absolute core of the world, to finish what their grandfather had started. Old Thomas saw the look pass between them, and nodded gently. "Yes," he said, "that is what comes next. But not tonight. Tonight is for this conversation. Tonight is for sitting with what you have just learned and letting it settle into the right place inside you. Tonight is for honoring a man who chose, in the last 3 years of his life, to use everything he had, his time, his strength, his presence, his life itself, to comfort someone he had never met because there was no one else who could. He looked at all 3 of them in turn. That is the kind of person he was, and that is what you come from. Carry it well." They sat at the table for a long time after that, without speaking very much. Nora made fresh tea. Caleb leaned slowly forward and rested his head briefly against Finn's shoulder, and Finn put his arm around his brother's shoulders and held him there. Old Thomas told them small stories about their grandfather throughout the evening. The way you tell small stories about someone you have loved when the time has finally come to share them. The way he laughed. The kinds of jokes he told. His habit of stopping mid-sentence to look at things. A small flower at the edge of a path. The particular quality of light through a kitchen window. The color of a child's hair in afternoon sun. Old Thomas described that habit, and Caleb said quietly, "That is what I do." Old Thomas smiled. "Yes, child," he said, "that is what he did. That is what all of you in this line do. You stop and you look. It is the most precious thing about you." Outside the window, the Highland night deepened. Embers slept in the barn. The fire in the hearth burned low and was rebuilt. The cottage was warm. 3 children and an old man sat together at a kitchen table in a small stone village, and they grieved properly for the first time a man who had built every path that had brought them all to this moment. And they grieved together, which is the only way that some kinds of grief can be properly carried. Late in the night, after old Thomas had gone home and the dishes had been washed and Nora had gone up to bed, Finn and Caleb sat together on the rocky shore below the cottage with Ember resting on the stones beside them. The stars over the Atlantic were extraordinary. Caleb had been quiet for a long time. Finally he said, "I think I understand now what I am for." Finn looked at him. "I do not mean the work," Caleb said. "I mean the existence. Why I was put in the mountain. why I was kept safe, why I have the gift. It was not in case anything happened to you. It was so that I could be the one to go down there." He paused. Our grandfather worked out in his last 3 years that he could not finish the work himself. He could only buy time. 80 years of time, give or take. And during that 80 years, there needed to be someone born who could finish it. He worked out the conditions that would allow that someone to grow up safely until they were old enough. And he set them in motion. He looked at Finn. I am here because he loved a stranger enough to make sure they would not be alone in the dark forever. And so are you. We are both his answer to a question he could not solve himself. Finn thought about this. He thought about all the people in his life, his mother, his father, Nora, Old Thomas, Ember, Caleb, Anya, the people they had not yet met, and the long, quiet, patient love that ran underneath everything, almost always invisible, the love that built rooms inside mountains and waited 42 years in meadows and walked alone down into the core of the world to keep a stranger company in the dark. He had not understood any of it until this evening. He understood it now, and he understood with the same clarity that he was going to spend the rest of his life trying to live in a way that honored it. Yes, Finn said quietly, we are both his answer, and that is a lesson at the center of this kid's adventure story for explorers, and it is the deepest one any of these stories has yet offered. There are people in your life whose love for you is so quiet and so patient that you may never fully see it until you are old enough to understand what you're looking at. Your parents, your grandparents, your teachers, the friends who showed up at the small, unglamorous moments of your life, the ones who chose to do things for you that you did not know they were doing. Honor them while you can. And when your own turn comes to be quietly patient for someone smaller than you, someone younger than you, someone who needs you in ways they do not yet know how to ask, be the kind of person worth being honored for. That is what love at its deepest looks like. Not loud, not photographed, not announced, just quietly present, just consistently chosen, generation after generation. That is what holds the world together. That is what your grandfather did. That is what you can do too. Hey, explorers, if you sat through this whole quiet evening at the kitchen table with Finn, Caleb, Nora, and Old Thomas today, and let the whole truth of their grandfather's last 3 years settle into your heart, give this video the biggest thumbs up it has ever received, because you have absolutely earned every moment of it. Our common question today is the most heartfelt one we have ever asked. Is there one person in your own life, a parent, grandparent, teacher, friend, whose quiet sacrifices for you have only become clear to you with time? Tell us about them in the comments below. Honor them in writing today. Every single response will be read. Subscribe to Whoosh Tales right now and ring that notification bell so you never miss a single adventure story for kids. Because next week Finn and Caleb begin the journey their grandfather started but did not finish. The compass needles begin to point downward, into the absolute core of the world, to the chamber where their grandfather has been quietly keeping company with a creature in the dark for 10 years. And what they find when they finally reach that chamber, and what waits for them there, will be the most important moment of all our adventures so far. We will see you next week, explorers. Hush! In the deepest part of that night, after Caleb had finally fallen asleep on his pile of blankets beside the bed, Finn lay awake and held his grandfather's compass in both hands in the dark. The original one, the big one, the one that had been pointing at Caleb since the moment Finn had carried out of the chamber beneath the cottage. He held it gently and watched its needle in the faint moonlight through the window. After a long moment, the needle moved, very slowly, for the first time since Caleb had walked out of the mountain. It rotated cleanly through 90 degrees and settled into a new direction. It pointed downward now, not at Caleb, not at any room or chamber Finn had yet visited, down into the earth, down toward the core of the world, down toward a chamber where, in the dark, an old man's careful, slowly fading presence still kept company with a creature who had been waiting 3,000 years for the light to come back. Finn closed his fingers gently around the compass and tucked it under his pillow and closed his eyes. We are coming, grandfather. He thought into the dark. Hold on a little longer. We are coming.